For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On a crisp autumn morning in 1996, two environmental researchers set out to investigate troubling reports along Germany's Neckar River. Lukas Anderson, a 31-year-old hydrologist, and Grace Thompson, a 27-year-old activist, launched their small research vessel into the dark waters near Stuttgart. They never returned to shore. Despite an exhaustive search by the Baden-Württemberg police and environmental authorities, both scientists seemed to vanish into the mist that hung over the river that day. Their abandoned boat, found anchored midstream with equipment still running, offered no answers. For 22 years, their colleagues and families lived with devastating uncertainty, while the river kept its sinister secret. Then, in 2018, a routine dredging operation along the industrial corridor of the Neckar uncovered evidence that would expose not only their fate, but also a decades-long conspiracy that had poisoned both people and nature. This is the complete investigation into what happened to Lukas Anderson and Grace Thompson. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this content, consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Now let's continue. The autumn morning of October 12, 1996, dawned crisp and clear over the Neckar River Valley. Mist rose from the water's surface as Lukas Anderson and Grace Thompson loaded their research equipment onto their modest motorboat at the Stuttgart University dock. The pair had spent months meticulously planning this expedition, carefully mapping testing points along the industrial corridor of the river, where local residents had reported unusual water discoloration. Lukas, a respected hydrologist with piercing blue eyes and prematurely graying hair, had dedicated his career to understanding the river's complex ecosystem. His partner that day, Grace Thompson, was an environmental activist whose passion for clean water had brought her from London to Germany 2 years earlier. Together, they represented a formidable investigative team, combining scientific rigor with unwavering environmental advocacy. Their colleagues later recalled the pair's excitement that morning. Lukas had recently developed a new testing protocol that could detect trace amounts of industrial chemicals, while Grace had gathered anonymous tips about late-night activity at several riverside factories. They carried with them specialized equipment, water sampling devices, a depth sounder, and Lukas's prized invention, a waterproof data logger capable of storing months of environmental readings. As they navigated downstream, the landscape gradually transformed from urban Stuttgart to industrial complexes that lined the riverbanks like silent sentinels. The morning progressed without incident as they collected samples and recorded data. At 2:15 p.m., Lukas made his final radio check with the university's research center. His voice was animated as he reported unusually high chemical readings near marker 47, approximately 30 kilometers downstream from their starting point. That was the last anyone heard from them. At 7:30 p.m., when the boat failed to return, university security initiated search procedures. By nightfall, local police had located their research vessel, anchored mid-river near an industrial complex. The scene was disturbing in its normalcy. Equipment still hummed, collecting data, while coffee cups sat half-empty in their holders. A detailed log showed entries until 2:45 p.m., then nothing. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of mechanical failure, and no indication of where Lukas and Grace had gone. The following days saw an unprecedented search effort. Police boats patrolled the river while helicopters scanned the banks. Dive teams searched the murky waters around the anchored boat, finding nothing but centuries of river silt. Detective Andrea Fischer of the Baden-Württemberg Environmental Police took charge of the investigation, sensing immediately that this was no ordinary missing persons case. The disappearance sent shockwaves through Stuttgart's academic community. Dr. Matthias Klein, head of the university's Environmental Sciences Department, spoke of Lucas's brilliance and dedication. He wasn't just collecting data, Klein explained to investigators. He was building a case. He believed something was seriously wrong with the river's chemistry, but he needed proof. Grace's colleagues at the Environmental Action Coalition were equally devastated. They described her as methodical and fearless, someone who had previously exposed corporate wrongdoing through careful research and documentation. Her office contained files on several local factories, though investigators found nothing immediately suggesting why she and Lucas had vanished. As autumn turned to winter, the search continued, but hope faded. The river, which had been both Lucas and Grace's passion and workplace, refused to yield its secrets. Their families maintained a vigil by the riverbank, watching search boats move back and forth across the water's surface, while beneath the depths, evidence of an environmental catastrophe and the truth about their loved one's fate lay hidden in the river's dark embrace. The case would remain unsolved for 22 years, becoming one of Baden-Württemberg's most puzzling disappearances. But the river, like truth itself, had a way of bringing secrets to the surface, and when it finally did, the revelations would shake the region to its core. Detective Andrea Fisher stood at her desk in the Baden-Württemberg Environmental Police Headquarters, studying the photographs spread before her. The images showed Lucas and Grace's research vessel exactly as it had been found, a scene that seemed frozen in time. Steam still rose from their abandoned coffee cups when the first responders arrived, suggesting the pair had vanished mere hours before discovery. Fisher had investigated environmental crimes for 15 years, but something about this case gnawed at her instincts. The boat's sophisticated testing equipment continued running when found, methodically collecting data from the river's depths. No signs of panic, no distress call, no indication of mechanical failure. It was as if Lucas and Grace had simply stepped off the face of the earth. The detective's first priority was analyzing the vessel itself. Forensics teams combed every inch of the boat, documenting scattered papers, water sampling equipment, and personal belongings. They found Grace's notebook, its final entry a series of coordinates and chemical readings. Lucas's prized laptop was present but password protected, its contents temporarily beyond reach. Working with university technicians, Fisher mapped the researchers' planned route. They had intended to take samples at 20 different points along the industrial corridor, focusing on areas downstream from factory outflow pipes. By the time they vanished, they had completed roughly 60% of their intended testing sites. Local river communities provided scattered accounts of seeing the research vessel that day. A fisherman recalled waving to them near marker 43. A riverside cafe owner remembered them stopping for lunch around noon, noting how animated they seemed while discussing their findings. But after 2:45 p.m., the trail went cold. Fisher interviewed dozens of factory workers and managers along the river. Most expressed shock at the disappearance, offering limited but cooperative responses. Yet the detective noticed a subtle tension when she mentioned water quality testing, a guardedness that seemed out of place for routine environmental research. The investigation took an intriguing turn when Dr. Matthias Klein shared his recent conversations with Lucas. The hydrologist had been excited about a new testing protocol he'd developed, one that could detect industrial chemicals at previously unmeasurable levels. Lucas had hinted at concerning preliminary results, but wanted absolute certainty before making any claims. Grace's apartment yielded another layer of complexity. Her home office contained meticulously organized files on local industrial facilities, including newspaper clippings about suspected environmental violations. One name appeared repeatedly in her notes: Heinrich Schulz, a factory supervisor, though the connection remained unclear. As weeks passed, the case defied conventional explanation. No bodies surfaced, no distress signals had been recorded, and no witnesses came forward with crucial information. The river's current had been moderate that day, ruling out accidental drowning. Weather conditions were optimal, eliminating environmental factors. Fisher found herself returning repeatedly to the research boat's location when discovered. It had been anchored precisely at testing station 47, suggesting Lucas and Grace had been actively working when they vanished. The sampling equipment was professionally deployed, the data logger still recording. Everything pointed to experienced researchers following their protocols until the moment of their disappearance. The detectives' attempts to access historical water quality data from the region met with bureaucratic resistance. Several factories cited confidentiality agreements and trade secrets, requiring court orders for basic information. This institutional stonewalling only strengthened Fisher's suspicion that Lucas and Grace had stumbled onto something significant. By Winter's arrival, the investigation had generated more questions than answers. Fisher's case files grew thick with interviews, technical reports, and theories, but hard evidence remained elusive. The family's pain was palpable at each briefing, their hope dimming with each passing day. Yet Fisher couldn't shake the feeling that the answer lay in the data Lucas and Grace had been collecting, information now locked away in waterlogged equipment and encrypted files, waiting to be discovered. The years following Lucas and Grace's disappearance settled like sediment over Baden-Württemberg, each passing season dimming hopes of resolution. Detective Andrea Fisher watched as the one-surgeon case gradually slipped from headlines to footnotes, though she never fully set it aside. Every 3 months, she would revisit the evidence, studying the photographs and reports until they were etched in her memory. The annual cycle of searches became routine. Each spring, when the river levels dropped, dive teams would explore new sections of the Neckar's murky depths. Every autumn, around the anniversary of the disappearance, helicopter surveys would scan the increasingly overgrown riverbanks. But the water kept its secrets, offering nothing but false hopes and dead ends. At Stuttgart Technical University, Lucas's office remained untouched for nearly 2 years, his calculations still visible on the whiteboard, his coffee mug gathering dust on the desk. Eventually, the department quietly packed away his belongings, though his research remained archived in the university's database, a testament to his unfinished work. Grace's environmental organization maintained her position open for a year, unable to accept that their passionate activist would never return. Her desk became an informal memorial, covered with photographs and newspaper clippings about the case. Her colleagues continued investigating industrial pollution along the Neckar, though none dared venture as deep into the research as Grace had. The families never gave up. Every October 12th, they would gather at the riverside where Lucas and Grace were last seen, releasing flowers into the current and sharing memories of the two researchers. Grace's mother, Patricia Thompson, flew in from London without fail, her determination to find answers undiminished by time. Lucas's sister, Maria Anderson, became an environmental advocate herself, ensuring her brother's work would not be forgotten. Detective Fisher maintained unofficial contact with the families, sharing what little updates she could gather. She watched as their raw grief gradually transformed into a quiet, persistent pain. The not knowing, she observed, was perhaps the cruelest aspect of their ordeal. The case file grew thin with time. New leads became rare, each one pursued with diminishing returns. Anonymous tips occasionally surfaced, sending investigators down paths that inevitably led nowhere. The research boat, initially held as evidence, was eventually released to the university, where it sat unused, too laden with memories for anyone to consider repurposing it. Local industry along the Neckar continued operations, though Fisher noticed subtle changes. Several factories upgraded their waste management systems, while others relocated their chemical storage facilities further from the riverbank. Whether these changes stemmed from guilt, fear, or genuine environmental concern remained unclear. Dr. Matthias Klein, who had worked closely with Lucas, continued analyzing water samples from the Neckar, using methods his former colleague had developed. He published several papers on river pollution, always acknowledging Luca's and Grace's contributions to the field. Their research, though unfinished, had sparked increased academic interest in industrial impact on river ecosystems. By 2000, the case had been officially designated cold, relegated to a filing cabinet in the Baden-Württemberg Environmental Policy headquarters. Yet Fisher kept a copy of the key evidence in her desk drawer, unwilling to fully surrender to the case's unresolved status. She had interviewed hundreds of people, analyzed countless documents, and still felt certain that somewhere in that mass of information lay the truth about what happened that autumn day. The river itself seemed to mock their efforts, flowing eternally past the spot where Luca's and Grace had vanished. Each year brought new sediment, new currents, new patterns of erosion and deposit. Fisher sometimes stood at the riverbank, watching the water move past, knowing it held answers just beyond her reach. The case might have gone cold, but somewhere beneath those dark waters lay a truth waiting to be discovered, preserved like the researchers' final moments in the river's timeless flow. In the late summer of 2018, the Neckar River finally began surrendering its long-held secrets. A routine dredging operation near Marker 47, aimed at deepening the channel for commercial vessels, brought more than river silt to the surface. The mechanical claw of the dredging vessel scraped against something solid, something that shouldn't have been there. As workers hauled up their find, the sight of human remains sent a ripple of shock through the crew. Entangled in decades of sediment lay two sets of skeletal remains, still partially clothed in the degraded fabric of outdoor wear. But it was what lay beside them that would break the case wide open, a waterproof case, sealed against the river's corrosive touch, containing Lucas Anderson's data logger. Word reached Detective Andrea Fisher within hours. She arrived to find the riverbank transformed into a forensic scene, bright lights illuminating the area as technicians carefully documented every detail. The detective's hands trembled slightly as she recognized the distinctive research equipment she had spent years searching for. Dr. Matthias Klein, now nearing retirement but still active in water quality research, was called to examine the recovered device. Working through the night in his laboratory, Klein managed to extract the data from the logger's protected memory. What he found left him pale and shaken. In those final hours before their disappearance, Lucas and Grace had documented something extraordinary. The data revealed systematic patterns of toxic chemical dumping, far exceeding any previous estimates. The readings showed spikes of industrial waste that could only have come from deliberate, coordinated releases. Lucas's final entries documented concentrations of carcinogens and heavy metals at levels that could devastate the river ecosystem and potentially harm thousands of residents downstream. Dental records quickly confirmed the remains belonged to Lucas and Grace. The position and condition of their bones told a story of violence. Both had suffered severe trauma before entering the water. The river had kept them hidden for 22 years, but now they were finally home. The discovery sparked an immediate expansion of the investigation. Environmental police teams began systematic testing along the entire industrial corridor, using Lucas's recovered testing protocols. The results were staggering. Decades of illegal dumping had created a toxic legacy in the river sediment, a poisonous archive of corporate greed and environmental disregard. Local residents who had long complained of unusual illness patterns suddenly had their suspicions validated. Medical researchers began cross-referencing health records with the chemical exposure data, revealing clusters of rare cancers and unexplained conditions along the river's course. Fisher found herself at the center of a rapidly expanding investigation. The recovered data logger contained more than just chemical readings. It held timestamps, locations, and most crucially, patterns that pointed to specific facilities and schedules. Lucas and Grace had unknowingly documented their own murder, preserving the evidence that would ultimately bring their killers to justice. The media descended on Baden-Württemberg as the story broke. International environmental organizations demanded action. Government officials scrambled to respond as the full scope of the pollution became clear. But for Fisher, the focus remained singular. The data proved that Lucas and Grace had been silenced because they discovered the truth. As autumn approached once again, Fisher stood at the spot where the remains were found, watching another generation of researchers collecting water samples. The river flowed on, its surface peaceful, betraying nothing of the darkness it had harbored for so long. But now, finally, the truth was rising to the surface, carried on the current of scientific evidence that Lucas and Grace had died to protect. Their families gathered once more at the riverside, this time to reclaim their loved ones and witness the beginning of justice. Patricia Thompson clutched her daughter's recovered research notebook, its pages still bearing the last observations Grace would ever make. Maria Anderson wept as she touched her brother's data logger, the instrument that had finally spoken for the dead. The river had kept its secret for 22 years, but in the end, science and persistence had prevailed. The discovery would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the industrial establishment to its core and bring a powerful reckoning for those who had thought their crimes safely buried in the depths of the Neckar River. As news of the recovered evidence spread through Baden-Württemberg's law enforcement community, a specialized task force quickly assembled. Detective Andrea Fisher found herself working alongside Agent Petra Schmidt, a veteran industrial crimes investigator whose reputation for unraveling complex corporate conspiracies preceded her. The team established their command center in a converted conference room at Environmental Police Headquarters, its walls soon covered with maps tracking illegal dumping sites. The data from Lucas's recovered device provided an invaluable baseline, marking locations where chemical concentrations had spiked to lethal levels during that fateful day in 1996. Dr. Matthias Klein's analysis revealed a sophisticated pattern of pollution. The dumping wasn't random but followed specific timetables, suggesting coordination between multiple facilities. The team began cross-referencing historical water quality data from the past 2 decades, discovering suspicious gaps in official monitoring records that aligned perfectly with periods of suspected dumping activity. Factory inspection records painted a troubling picture. Several facilities along the Neckar had systematically falsified their environmental compliance reports. Others showed suspicious patterns of leadership changes and ownership transfers that coincided with peaks in river contamination. The investigation team discovered that many of these companies shared board members, suggesting a network of collaboration. Agent Schmidt's expertise proved crucial as she untangled the complex web of corporate relationships. She identified a pattern of shell companies used to purchase chemical disposal permits, all leading back to a central group of executives. These permits, while legitimate on paper, had been used to mask quantities of waste far exceeding legal limits. The breakthrough came when Fisher reviewed Grace Thompson's recovered notebooks. Among her meticulous observations were references to late-night activity at specific factories, particularly one overseen by Supervisor Heinrich Schulz. Grace had documented unusual patterns of truck movements and noted that certain outflow pipes showed signs of recent modifications. Historical satellite imagery revealed changes to factory infrastructure that corresponded with Grace's notes. Loading docks had been relocated, security cameras repositioned, and new access roads constructed, all changes that seemed designed to obscure activities along the riverbank. The investigation team began conducting interviews with former factory employees, many of whom had left the industry years earlier. Their testimonies painted a picture of systematic intimidation and cover-ups. Several recalled being warned to ignore unusual activities during night shifts, while others spoke of bonuses paid for discretion regarding certain operations. Water samples taken from the sites identified in Lucas's data showed alarming levels of contamination still present in the river sediment. The team discovered that the toxic chemicals had not dissipated, but had instead accumulated in layers, creating a chronological record of industrial pollution that stretched back decades. As Fisher and Schmidt dug deeper, they uncovered a pattern of suspicious accidents and unexplained departures among employees who had raised environmental concerns. None had been as thoroughly documented as Lucas and Grace's disappearance, but together they suggested a long-standing practice of silencing potential whistleblowers. The investigation soon focused on a central figure, Heinrich Schulz, whose name appeared repeatedly in connection with suspicious activities. His career had advanced rapidly during the years of heaviest pollution, and his authority extended across multiple facilities. Former colleagues described him as a man who demanded absolute loyalty and dealt harshly with those who questioned company practices. By the investigation's 6th week, the team had assembled a compelling case. They had mapped a network of illegal dumping operations, documented decades of environmental violations, and identified key players in what amounted to an environmental crime syndicate. Most importantly, they had established clear links between these activities and the fate of Lucas Anderson and Grace Thompson. The evidence painted a chilling picture of what had likely occurred on that autumn day in 1996. Lucas and Grace had unknowingly documented the largest illegal dumping operation in the region's history, and their precision testing equipment had captured data that would have exposed the entire network. They had simply been in the wrong place at the right time, and that knowledge had cost them their lives. The morning Heinrich Schulz was arrested, frost still clung to the windows of his Stuttgart villa. 2 decades of careful planning and meticulous cover-ups crumbled in the early dawn, as environmental police officers led the aging factory supervisor away in handcuffs. The man who had once commanded a vast network of industrial pollution now seemed diminished, his face ashen as Detective Andrea Fisher read him his rights. The evidence against Schulz had crystallized with devastating clarity. Lucas Anderson's recovered data logger had captured more than just chemical readings on that fatal day in 1996. The device's GPS tracking revealed that the research boat had been stationary for exactly 17 minutes at the precise location, where an illegal dumping operation was in progress. The timing matched perfectly with records of Schulz's presence at the facility, documented by security logs Fisher's team had subpoenaed. Former employees, their silence finally broken by the weight of evidence, began coming forward. They described a sophisticated system of midnight chemical releases coordinated by Schulz himself. The supervisor had developed an elaborate code system for communication, using seemingly innocent maintenance schedules to signal when massive quantities of toxic waste would be discharged into the Neckar's waters. Grace Thompson's recovered notebook provided the final, damning connection. Her last entry, written just hours before her death, contained a detailed description of a modified outflow pipe she had observed, one that perfectly matched the specifications of illegal discharge systems found at multiple facilities under Schulz's supervision. She had even sketched the unique valve configuration that would later become a crucial piece of evidence. The investigation revealed that Schulz had been monitoring Lucas and Grace's research activities for weeks before their disappearance. Security camera footage, preserved in long-forgotten archive tapes, showed his car following their boat launch on multiple occasions. Phone records documented calls between Schulz and security personnel tracking the researchers' movements along the river. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered that Schulz had orchestrated similar operations across Baden-Württemberg for nearly 3 decades. His network included 12 other high-ranking industrial managers, all of whom had profited enormously from avoiding proper chemical disposal costs. The scheme had saved their companies millions while poisoning the river and endangering countless lives. The recovered evidence revealed the terrible efficiency of Schulz's organization. They had developed methods to mask chemical signatures, falsify water quality reports, and maintain a facade of environmental compliance that had fooled regulators for years. But they hadn't counted on Lucas Anderson's innovative testing protocols or Grace Thompson's relentless determination to uncover the truth. When confronted with the overwhelming evidence, several of Schulz's co-conspirators began negotiating with prosecutors. They described how Schulz had personally overseen the disposal of Lucas and Grace's bodies, using his intimate knowledge of river currents to hide them in a deep channel where he believed they would never be found. The dredging operation that eventually revealed their remains had been the result of a cruel twist of fate, a routine river maintenance project that cut through decades of accumulated secrets. The investigation's findings sent shockwaves through Germany's industrial sector. Schulz's arrest triggered a cascade of revelations about corporate environmental crimes that extended far beyond the Neckar River Valley. Health authorities began comprehensive studies of affected communities, documenting elevated cancer rates and chronic conditions that could be traced directly to the contaminated water. In his final interview before being charged, Schulz remained coldly pragmatic about his crimes. He spoke of profit margins and market competition, treating the deaths of Lucas and Grace as mere operational expenses. His lack of remorse stood in stark contrast to the decades of suffering his actions had caused. As Fisher completed the arrest documentation, she thought of the families who had waited 22 years for this moment. Lucas and Grace had died protecting the truth about the river they loved, and now that truth would finally be their vindication. Their scientific dedication, preserved in waterproof equipment and sealed notebooks, had reached across time to ensure justice would eventually prevail. The case against Schulz and his conspirators was airtight. The evidence they had tried to sink in the Neckar's depths had resurfaced with devastating clarity, carrying with it the weight of 2 decades of crimes against both humanity and nature. The river, which had been both crime scene and silent witness, had finally yielded its terrible secrets, ensuring that those who had died protecting it had not sacrificed their lives in vain. The trial of Heinrich Schulz began on a cold January morning in 2019, drawing international media attention to the Stuttgart courthouse. The aging factory supervisor sat emotionless as prosecutors presented their case, methodically outlining decades of environmental crimes culminating in the murders of Lucas Anderson and Grace Thompson. Over 6 weeks, the court heard testimony from more than 70 witnesses. Former employees described Schulz's iron-fisted control over the illegal dumping operations. Environmental scientists detailed the devastating impact on the Neckar River ecosystem. Medical experts presented studies linking the contamination to elevated cancer rates in riverside communities. Lucas's recovered data proved pivotal. The prosecution demonstrated how his innovative testing methods had captured irrefutable evidence of systematic pollution. Grace's detailed notes, preserved despite their years underwater, provided crucial context that connected Schulz directly to the crime scene. The families attended every day of the trial. Patricia Thompson clutched her daughter's worn notebook as prosecutors read Grace's final observations aloud. Maria Anderson wept silently when they played the last radio transmission from her brother's boat. Their presence served as a constant reminder of the human cost of corporate greed. The verdict, when it came, was unequivocal. Schulz and his 12 co-conspirators were found guilty of all charges. The judge's sentence reflected the magnitude of their crimes: life imprisonment for Schulz, with substantial terms for his accomplices. The court also mandated the largest environmental remediation effort in German history, with costs exceeding 500 million euros. The aftermath transformed the region's approach to environmental protection. New legislation, dubbed the Anderson-Thompson Act, established unprecedented monitoring requirements for industrial facilities. The University of Stuttgart created a research center dedicated to river ecosystem protection, naming it after the two murdered scientists. Health studies revealed the true scope of the contamination's impact. Over 3,000 residents showed elevated levels of toxic compounds linked to the illegal dumping. A compensation fund was established, though no amount of money could truly address decades of exposure to dangerous chemicals. The cleanup effort proved monumental. Teams of environmental engineers began the painstaking process of removing contaminated sediment from the river bottom. Water quality experts implemented Lucas's testing protocols throughout the river system, creating an early warning network for future pollution events. Grace's environmental organization experienced a surge of support, with young activists drawn to her legacy of courage. They established a scholarship in her name, supporting students committed to environmental protection. Lucas's research methods became standard procedure for water quality monitoring across Europe. Detective Andrea Fisher retired shortly after the trial, having finally closed the case that had haunted her career. Her last official act was to return Lucas's data logger to his family, the device that had finally brought justice after 22 years beneath the river's surface. The Neckar River itself began showing signs of recovery. Species that had vanished decades ago gradually returned to its waters. Local children were finally able to swim in areas that had been dangerous for generations. The river's healing became a symbol of nature's resilience and the power of truth to emerge even after years of darkness. Each October, people gather at Marker 47 to remember Lucas and Grace. They release environmentally safe lanterns onto the water, creating a river of light to honor two researchers who gave their lives protecting it. Their story is now taught in German schools as a testament to scientific integrity and environmental stewardship. The legacy of the case extends far beyond the courtroom verdict. It stands as a watershed moment in environmental crime prosecution, proving that no corporation is above the law and no truth can remain submerged forever. Lucas Anderson and Grace Thompson died pursuing scientific truth, but in death, they achieved something even greater. They forced a reckoning that would protect generations to come. The river flows cleaner now, its waters carrying the memory of two dedicated scientists who refused to look away from inconvenient truths. Their sacrifice ensured that the Neckar would no longer be a silent accomplice to industrial crimes, but would instead become a living monument to the power of scientific integrity and the enduring quest for environmental justice.